All right, so now let's dive deeper into the understanding of Godot's approach and Unity's approach. So in my Unity editor, you can see there are three game objects which comes as default. If you are already aware with the Unity engine, so you might know that these three game objects comes by default. So main camera, directional light, and a global volume. Okay, so if you say game object, so each game object is having a basic transform which contains position, rotation, and scale, and then we add all sort of different components to make a desired behavior. Okay, so for example, if I want to create a jumping ball, okay, so what I have to do is I have to go to the 3D menu, and from here I'll choose a sphere. Okay, now the sphere that I have just added is nothing but simply a 3D mesh. Okay, and let's just rename this as ball. So if I go ahead and try to inspect this sphere into my inspector window, you can see that this game object has this transform which has position, rotation, and scale. Then we have a mesh filter added as a component. We have a mesh renderer as a component, and then we have a sphere collider added as a component to define its collision area. Okay, and I can obviously remove these items. So for example, let's say if I want to remove a component, I can remove these, and if I remove all the component, so now this is just an empty game object which has only this transform available within our scene. So this is the thing. See, in Unity, game object is nothing but a single blank object which has transform, and that's it. Then we keep adding the components, different components, to make the desired behavior. So for example, right now I have removed all the components from it, and right now you can see this is nothing but just an empty game object, right? And for example, if I want to make it into a sphere, so all I have to do is click on add component, and from here, for example, I can add a mesh filter. Okay, so I have added a mesh filter component, and from here I can select a sphere. Okay, then I can add a mesh renderer component, and this mesh renderer component obviously needs a material. So if I want, I can just use the default diffuse material, and I'm using the let's say use this one, and for some reason the shaders are not coming correctly. Okay, no issues, I can go here and I can create a ball material. Okay, and I can go ahead and apply that onto it, and now I can finally add a sphere collider in order to add the collision area of this ball. And now if I want this ball to fall down, because right now what will happen if I go ahead and hit play, so I have not defined the ball to interact with the physics. So what is going to happen is this ball is going to stay still. So let's see that in a moment, just give it some time. So yeah, you can see now the ball is not falling because obviously I have not added any component that makes this ball interact with the physics of Unity, right? So what I can do is I can go ahead and add a rigid body to it, and now if I hit play, the ball is now going to interact with the physics system and it is going to fall down, right? Now let's switch back to Godot, and here we have this our 3D scene window. Okay, and for here for this one, if I want to achieve something similar, so let's see how we can do it. Okay, so unlike Unity's system, in Godot everything is a node, so everything is a node based system, right? And the main difference between Unity's and Godot's approach is that you create the node first and then you add sub nodes to define its further behavior, but there has to be a parent root node. Okay, so for example, in Unity, if I let me switch back to Unity. So in Unity we have this dedicated scene, so whatever items that I'm going to put inside this scene is going to be rendered via my main camera, right? But in Godot, we don't have a dedicated scene like that. So every node can itself act like a scene, and it's up to you that which node you want to be set to be loaded as a your scene. So for example, in my case, I'll create a scene. So let's add this 3D scene node, and I'll rename this to something world, although it's not necessary, but I'm just doing it for keeping everything organized. So now let's say that this particular node is going to be my main world scene, which is going to be loaded every time I hit that play button. Okay, so I'll press Ctrl S to save my scene, and let's just name this as main scene. So right now I'm not creating any folder structure or anything because I just want to show you the difference. So now let's say I want to add the ball into my scene. So what should I do? So in Unity's case, you saw that we, from just an empty game object, we can keep on adding different components and our desired result will fall into the place. But in Godot, we have to take some additional steps. So what additional steps is, for example, I have to add a ball here, and I want this ball to be a type of rigid body so that it can interact with the game engine's physics system. So in Godot, what you have to do is you have to decide first that what should be the parent root node of your component that you want. So for example, in my case, I want a rigid body ball, right? So first thing first, I'll add a rigid body. Okay, so I'll add a rigid body 3D because I want to create a 3D ball. So I have added a rigid body 3D, and right now there is nothing to render, right? So for this rigid body 3D, if I consider this as the parent root node of my ball, I can go ahead and add a mesh instance 3D so that I can render something. And from the inspector, I can select a mesh just like we selected a mesh filter from here in the Unity. So we have to select a mesh instance and default primitive type of this shape, sphere shape. Okay, and then obviously we have a rigid body here, so we need to define some area where up to which boundary, what is the boundary of that area that this 3D mesh is going to collide with. Similarly, we have added here a sphere collider, remember? So same thing we have to add over here. So as a child of rigid body 3D, we are going to add a mesh collider. So I'll just type in collider, and here you can say, see this collision shape 3D. So I'm going to add this node, collision shape 3D, and then from the shape, from the inspector panel, we are going to create a new collision shape, sphere shape. So it is going to take the default size of our sphere, and it's done. Okay, so one additional step, that in Unity we get the camera and lights, these thing added by default, but in Godot we have to add it ourselves. So what we have to do is just click on the world node, add a child, and this time I'm gonna add a camera. Okay, and from Godot 4.4 onwards, we get this nice little preview window. So keeping the camera node selected, we can drag this camera like this in order to see here how my game view is going to be like. And let's just adjust a little bit, something like this, and maybe like that. Okay, that's fine. So I'll hit Ctrl S to save, and now if I hit play, so now I have to define to the engine that which scene do I need to load as my default scene, right? So I have, in my case, I have only one single scene over here called main scene. So I'm going to set it to current, and now you can see the ball just fall down. Okay, now you may think the lighting is not perfect, so that's totally fine. What I have to do is add sun to the scene, and let's add an environment to the scene. So now we have the environment and we have a directional light added to the scene. Hit Control S, hit play, and now you see the ball just fell down. So this is the major difference between the node system architecture and the component system architecture. So from this section, you have learned that the game object can have different components added into the game object, which this is the default component system workflow in Unity. Whereas if you come to Godot, the each node defines different behavior to form the overall object. So for example, if I wanted to create the rigid body ball, so first I have added a rigid body as the parent root node, and then I have added the mesh instance 3D to create the mesh shape. Then I have added the collision shape to define the collision area, and then I got the desired result. Okay, now in the next section we will see how the scripting is different from Unity's versus Godot.